This is a member suite, and that lovely little gadget I found one Valentine's Day at, I think, Walgreens or something. And I have to admit, I bought it for a friend and didn't give it to him. I kept it. I'm Denise McCluggage, and I'm here with Peter Egan, and we're going to talk about what it is about motorcycles. What is the attraction?
Well, there are a lot of different types of things that attracted me to motorcycles. I think dynamically is the dynamics of motorcycles are part of it. It's a motorcycle compared with a car. It's always acting through your own axis. You know, you lean in corners, the centripetal thing. So it's sort of. I fly aerobatic airplanes, or I used to. I don't anymore. But it's sort of the road-going version of that. You know, you are always at the center of force with a motorcycle.
Yeah.
So that it's one of the things that contributes to your sense of well-being when you're going through a corner and fun. I raced motorcycles for a while, road raced, and it was interesting to me because I had started out racing cars before I got into motorcycles, which is the reverse of what a lot of people have done. And I realized that I could spend a lot more time on the track with a motorcycle without getting beaten up. You know, I'd get out of a Formula Ford after a half-hour race, and I'd discover later I had bruises everywhere, and I'd be kind of physically tired, you know, after a long race or an enduro.
Really? That's interesting.
With a motorcycle, I could go out and go through a practice session, and then the next session would be open to anyone, and I'd go right back out. And part of it was, of course, the motorcycle was more reliable than my British sports cars. But also, I would just notice at the end of the day that I wasn't as tired physically, and I think that's all part of how forces are applied to you when you're.
Well, it seems to me that the idea of balance, appeals to us. Balanced emotionally, balanced physically, balanced intellectually, balance and harmony, and it is so immediately represented on a motorcycle.
It is, and I think when you're a kid, you look at people on motorcycles. For instance, when my parents moved to our hometown in about 1952, I was 4 or 5 years old, and the guy next door had a motorcycle, a big Harley, and I would watch him get on that and ride away with it, and I would think, will I ever be able to do that? How does he do that? And I think if you notice that when you're a kid, and then you learn to ride a bicycle, and you're kind of secretly relieved that you can do that. There's nothing terribly magical about it. And then you find out that you can, once you're on a bicycle, you can also ride a motorcycle. And so I think from a very early age, you're sort of fascinated with that balance thing, that will I be able to do that? And then there's this sort of pleasure in discovering that you can. And when you transfer the bicycle thing to a motorcycle, bicycles for most of us are the first real freedom that we have. You know, you live in a small town like I did, and all of a sudden you realize you can balance a bicycle, and all of a sudden you can get to the other end of the town in 5 minutes, or you can take a bicycle ride to see your girlfriend in another town, you know, and get there. And you don't have to ask your parents to drop you off, and you don't have to trudge along in the hot sun. And so by the time you go through that bicycle phase, you start looking at motorcycles and you think, well, that would be perfect because it's as fun as bicycling, but I can go anywhere. And I had my first real motorcycle ride actually while I was hitchhiking. I was trying to get to a junkyard, an auto scrap yard in a town called New Lisbon, which was about 10 miles away from my hometown.
Wisconsin.
Yeah, in Wisconsin. I was going there to look at a Crosley engine because I thought I knew that they had a wrecked Crosley, and I thought if I could just get that engine, I could build a race car, you know, around it, which of course I couldn't do. But I was hitchhiking, and 2 guys went by on big Harleys. They were panheads with full windshield and so on. And one of the guys pulled over and stopped, and he, you know, kind of hop on, kid. And the other guy said, "Come on, you know, we don't want to be picking people. No, give the kid a ride. It's hot out." So I got on the back of this buddy seat on the Harley, and they took off for New Lisbon, and I was looking over his shoulder with tears coming out of my eyes from the wind, and he got up to 80 miles an hour at one point. And I just looked around myself and I thought, this is the best thing I've ever done.
Yeah.
And if these guys had said we're going to Alaska, I would have just said, well, yeah, I'll go to Alaska too, and I'll just call my mom and dad when I get there and tell them that I'm not going to be coming home for dinner. But luckily for me, they were only going to New Lisbon to a Harley dealer. And when I got there, instead of going to the junkyard, I just stood around the Harley dealership all day looking at bikes, and they had a small Harley at the time, which was called a Hummer. And I thought I could buy one of those, and then I could do this. I wouldn't have to stand by the road hitchhiking. And there was all this romance. It was like, well, it still exists today. If you're flying, there's something about an open airplane, like flying in biplanes more than closed airplanes. It's just something about leaning over the side and looking down and not having a window that is a different thing. And I think, to some extent, motorcycles for me, I'm an aviation buff too. They're always kind of the road-going version of a Stearman or a sport plane with an open cockpit.
Yeah.
It's a strange combination of romance and dynamics, or pits, yeah, if you get into a sport bike. A lot of, once again, it's like the car thing. You don't know why your brain is suddenly enlivened by an image, but it's like the Harley ride. I think a short time after that I saw Lawrence of Arabia, and Peter O'Toole at the beginning of Lawrence of Arabia is adding oil and getting his rough superior ready for a ride, and he takes off, of course, and he's going faster and faster down these village streets and out into the countryside. And I looked at that and I thought, I've just got to have a motor. I've just got to do that. I've got to get up on a Sunday morning and check the oil and get on a motorcycle and go faster and faster down a tree-lined road. And a friend of mine pointed out, he said, he got killed. And he said, I saw that movie and decided I would never get on a motorcycle. I didn't care. That was just a mistake, you know.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
That's the very thing. I said, that had never happened to me. I would.
What attracted you?
That was just his problem.
Yeah, right, yeah. So. Well, that's it, you know. Mm-hmm. I mean, because as the saying used to be about motor racing is a sport at which you can get killed or can kill yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always interesting your belief in your own ability to avoid one.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have to know kind of who is responsible, the vehicle or yourself.
Yeah, I think at some point we all make a decision probably when we're younger that you'd rather risk death than not be one of the people who does that.
Yeah.
It's the same with mountain climbers. You know, you can get killed climbing, but not to climb would be so awful that you might as well be dead if you don't go mountain climbing. I mean, so it's just you have to love something well enough to take the risks and figure that's part of the.
Well, I learned about risk in a sense when I parachuted.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my attitude toward risk, and I jumped out of an airplane with a parachute. It was a static line jump and thing, and it was. To me, a very frightening thing in a way, because I realized that everything else I had done that was dangerous, something had to go wrong before I was at risk. Here, I was already dead the minute I got out of the airplane. Mm-hmm. Something had to go right to
save your life.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And I thought, I'll never be able to race again. I'll never be able to get on a motorcycle again. And then I realized the risk is there always. Mm-hmm. It is just whether it's more obvious or not. You read about people sitting watching TV, and a truck comes through the living room,
right,
and crushes them. You know, think they weren't having an awful lot of fun.
No.
And they were at risk. It's less or whatever. So. Afterwards, I was very careful. I always waited not until the light went red. I always waited till the car stopped before I crossed. Mm-hmm. And then I no, it's always there. You have to just balance it out. And again, we come back to the balance thing.
Right.
And I'm very attracted to motorcycles. However, I can't drive right anymore. I had
and I'm sitting here with 3 broken ribs at the moment, and a broken foot. But yeah.
Well, I did a head thing over, and I hadn't ridden for about 40 years, and decided I wanted to do Kyle Petty's run. So Tom Purvis at BMW sent me a 650 GS and said, "Here, you know." Well, I had never been on anything like that anyway, because my first motorcycle was a 50cc Honda
Right,
off-road.
It's a relatively tall bike too.
Yeah, but still, I see anytime I see a motorcycle go by, I say, "Oh, you lucky pup," you know, kind of. There, you can still do that. That's fun.
Yeah, well, you know, you have to love it. I think, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, you and I have both. We were talking about it. We both bungee jumped, and we've both done free fall. You know, done parachute jumps, and I said to Barb after we did about a 10,000 foot free fall skydiving experience, and I did a bungee jump probably off the same bridge you did, off
New
the
Zealand.
Shotover Gorge in New Zealand. And I said, well, this was exciting, but I don't love it enough that I need to do it every week,
No.
you know, or ever again, really.
Yeah.
But with cars and motorcycles, I love the sport, and therefore, you know, I know there's risk. I just had a crash this June, just a minor dirt bike crash, but I broke some ribs. But I have lots of friends who have broken collarbones and legs and so on, but it's just part of the deal. If you really like to do it, you put up with that risk. But if you don't like it well enough, then you start thinking of it as a risk all the time rather than having fun.
Right.
So it just depends on what appeals to you.
Well, my first introduction to a lengthy involvement was my first love when I was just out of high school, and he had an Indian 45, and he would come tooling by my house, and we'd go for a ride. And I knew it was my first love. He was first guy I ever called by his first name, because we were always called, you know. Hey, I'd say, "Hey, Egan, want to come over and play?" You know, that kind of thing. That was the,
we all did that too.
You know, everybody was by their last name, and I actually called him Neil, which was and it was double love. You know, this wonderful freedom and the individuality of the freedom. You know, you can go where you want to go.
Right.
And no one even needs to know you're there or where or what. And you don't even need to know where you want to go. You just go.
You can be anywhere.
And it was so appealing to me. Of course, they all filled with sadness. I went off to college and came back on the Christmas vacation, and he had been killed the day before on the thing.
On the motorcycle.
On the motorcycle, yeah. So it was... But it was almost an introduction to, you know, you around racing and things, you know, it's...
Yeah, well, you lived through also an exceptionally dangerous time. The most glorious time in racing, when you were racing, but also probably the most dangerous.
Was, you know, people just died. But also, I just had very bad luck choosing friends. They always got killed somewhere.
Hang out with people who do crazy things.
But the motorcycle appeal remained with me, and then when I got one of the first Honda 50cc bikes and I had it up in Vermont, and it was great. I would go off in the woods, you know, and then one time I got off in the woods alone, and I was getting off the bike. Well, there was like 2 feet of dead leaves. And it looked solid ground to me. Well, I stood there, and the bike came falling in on top of me, and I finally managed to get out, and I thought, you know, I could be up here all winter, nobody would. Whatever happened to that girl living on the hill, you know, kind of thing.
Everybody's saying, how come she don't write?
Yeah. She used to have this newspaper, and it just stopped, you know.